We'd have our finances repaired by 2014. The government was already creating, on paper anyway, hundreds of thousands of jobs ready to be unleashed on the economy. There wasn't a whole lot to worry about. And then 2 weeks ago, we all woke up to the morning news and realized that the future was cancelled. I want to just explain, there's a number of reasons why, but I want to look at two particular, what would you call them, two particular misunderstandings, if you will, that have dominated the debate and which I believe seduced the government itself. Because essentially what went wrong is they just forgot to carry the one. They did a very simple mistake. And I want to talk about that. And I'll be talking initially some numbers, and I won't make it too heavy with the numbers. But I mean, every morning we wake up, you know, it's 7 billion, it's 15 billion. We're going to cut 1 billion. Unemployment is 13.3. Employment has gone down 12.5 since the beginning of the recession. Unfortunately, we have to talk numbers, but I'll keep it very minimal. But I want to do it because the numbers, I think, will lead us, in one way, lead us to some very fundamental political truths. Back in 2009, we were told that if we cut spending and if we increase taxes on low and average income earners, that we would be able to reduce the deficit, and because of that, the international markets would be so impressed with us, it would cut the cost of borrowing. The reason why the government is having to come back for more is because after cutting 12 billion euros out of the economy, unprecedented, by the way, unprecedented in modern European history, 12 billion after the economy, what did they find? The deficit was actually higher than when they started out. And that borrowing costs had increased by nearly 40%. The international markets were not impressed at all. Now, how can you cut 12 billion out of the economy and still find the deficit going up? Well, it's very easy to explain. And by the way, I just want to kind of come in on what Terry was saying. There is no consensus among economists that this strategy that the government is pursuing is any good. You might think that listening to Morning Ireland or reading the Irish Times or something like that. You'd think that all economists were agreeing with that. Absolutely not. Economists up and down the country disagree with this strategy, because it was wholly predictable what was happening. And in fact, Terry and myself signed an open letter in the Irish Times some months ago, which said that the government's deflationary strategy would fail, full stop. There are two basic reasons why it failed, and what you should be aware of when you're listening to the news or reading the newspaper or whatever. The first is the idea that cuts equal savings. Now, by the way, that sounds terribly commonsensical, because at the household level it's correct. And that's why when you get polls, understandably, you know, the opinion polls, the majority of people say, well, let's cut spending rather than increase taxes. Totally understandable. Not because people are selfish, but because when I cut my spending in my household, it goes into my pocket. For instance, I smoke cigarettes. There are many reasons why I should give up cigarettes. And they increase public expenditure somewhere else. I want to give an example of this. Cutting public services is about the daftest thing you can do. I mean, if you really have to cut things, there's better things to cut than public services. Not for cutting stuff like that, but cutting public services is the daftest thing to do. If you cut public services, there are two things that you cut. You either cut the people who carry out the service, like the teachers in the schools, or you cut contracts with the private sector. Because a school only operates because there's a teacher, and there are blackboards and school and desks and chairs and all that. Well, the government doesn't have a factory to make the blackboards and chairs and desks and all that. They have to buy them from the private sector. That's why it's called government consumption. This is the things that either they both employ people and buy things from the private sector so that they can create the service, whether it's health or education, something like that. If you cut that, you are cutting either your employment level and or you are cutting the contracts with the private sector, and then of course that has a knock-on effect in the private sector economy. The ISRI measured this. This is nothing new. The ISRI measured it, and they did it twice. They said that if you cut €1 billion out of public services, two things would happen. Well, a number of things would happen. What they did was they looked at the impact on employment. By the way, employment will fall by 18,000. That was their estimate. 18,000 less people at work because you cut €1 billion out of public services. You will obviously cut consumer demand, because there's 60,000 less jobs. If you cut consumer demand, of course, that has knock-on effects for the business, and then they will have to start reducing the wages and the hours of their employees, and they're getting less money. So they did all this total thing, and they found that if you cut public services by €1 billion, you will what's called cut the economy, the income of the economy, by 1.4 billion. And the government will end up saving 300 million euros. People don't experience that at the household. In other words, in effect, the government is cutting the income of the economy by 4 times the rate it is savings. Now, I wouldn't try doing that at home. If you tried cutting, if you said, well, I'm going to do this to make a savings of this, but it's going to cost me 4 times my income, you'd go broke in a matter of months. And that's exactly what has happened to the government. If we don't base our arguments on those principles of solidarity and social justice, then we are lost. However, there's another reason to oppose the cuts. It's because they don't work. It is mathematically, economically, politically, and socially impossible for the deflation that the government is proposing to work to repair the public finances. For the simple reason that you cannot cut your way out of a recession. You cannot tax your way. You cannot let joblessness rise. You can't let businesses fall. You can't degrade your public services. All these are part of the economic activity which we have to boost. If you do all these things, you will fail to repair the public finances. And Unite will be coming out with this kind of numbers argument, because they want to play the game with numbers. Fine, we can beat them there. We beat them on social values. We can beat them on the economic arguments. I want to quickly run through what are some new starting points to get out of this obvious failure that's coming down the line. And 15 billion, I mean, it's incredible to think about. We've had 12 billion cut already, and look at the misery and hurt. And the misery and hurt is still coming down the line. We're still feeling it. Because there is an ability for all people to contribute to limiting the recession. But if you're poor, and this government is intent on making people even poorer, and you don't have much money, there's not a whole lot you can do to contribute to that. So that equal societies tend to have that solidarity principle based in that. So when I talk about investment, I talk about it on the broad scheme. So that when people ask me, well, do you support a 15 billion euro fiscal adjustment? I say, yeah, I do, absolutely. Absolutely support it. I think we should have 15 billion euro investment over the next 4 or 5 years to put people back to work, to modernize our infrastructure, to modernize our public services. And when you start doing that, and again, it can be shown on these little Excel sheets, you can increase tax revenue, reduce public expenditure,